Okay, hello everyone. So thank you for tuning in for today's Tech Talk with UIUX. And so we have Olivia and Sohini here who can begin their talk in any moment now.
Hi, so I'm Sohini and Olivia's my co-host, and we are part of the UIUX at MIT club. And today we'll be talking a bit more about UIUX and how to design. So, Olivia, are you sharing your screen? Yeah. Okay, so to kick us off, we can go over today's schedule a little bit. So we're going to begin with an overview of UI/UX and our club, and then we'll go into a little workshop on design comparisons. We'll talk a bit more about both UX and UI principles, and in the end, we'll actually build a travel app live. So our club's mission is defined as bringing general awareness to design, UI, and UX methodologies, opportunities, and information to MIT. We have a lot of materials in our public Google Drive, and we're always willing to spread more awareness about UI/UX. So diving into UI/UX as a field, it kind of defines how we interact with products. So it encompasses design, technology, psychology, and human-computer interaction. So being a UI/UX designer opens up a lot of career paths. So we can quickly dive into the actual difference between UI and UX. So UI often tends to be considered as falling under UX. UX design focuses on the process of developing user-centric products. The process can be applied to designing both physical and digital products, like the websites you visit, your supermarket, bank ATMs, and more. UX involves a lot of problem solving, especially in identifying user needs and also solving them. And so the focus is on the overall feel of a product, in seeing how it flows and how it accomplishes the main tasks of being useful and useful. We'll be going over the UX design process in more detail soon. UI design stands for user interaction design or user interface design. This is more about the aesthetics of a digital product, and we can define interface as a mediation of users' tasks and a system's core functions. So UI design incorporates defining how a product looks, like the branding, the color palette, the fonts and typography, how the buttons work, and more. So the focus here is a bit more on the visuals. So to think about the difference between the two, we can use a painting analogy. A UI without UX is like a painter just putting paint onto a canvas without thought, and UX without UI is like the frame of the canvas without the cloth. And so great product experience starts with UX followed by UI, but both of them are really important for creating an amazing product. So to illustrate exactly how important both of these are, we'll go through some design critiques. So we're going to show two different designs trying to accomplish the same goal and call out any problems in the designs. So first of all, this is kind of a travel website. And so there's two different examples on here. And so just to kick us off, I'll walk through which one's better, which is the one on the right. And so the reason why this one is kind of a bit better is because it's a bit more balanced. Or sorry, I meant left. Yeah, so it's a bit more balanced. In general, the typography is a bit better because it tends to conform to the overall aesthetics a bit more. It's more balanced using the typography. There's more consistency in the fonts and the shapes that are used. Specifically, there's not like mixing of the square and the circular buttons. It all kind of conforms to the circular buttons. And there's also, it uses established patterns like the F shape, which we'll talk about a bit more, but it's how we read different blocks of content. So moving on, we have another example of a website, and these are kind of two different types of personal websites. And if we go to the next one, we'll see that the one on the right is the one that we'd prefer in this case. So mixing typography is fine if it serves a purpose, but on the left-hand side's one, it kind of just makes it less readable. It's really important to make sure that your website or your product in general is really accessible and is able to be used by a lot of people. Additionally, the one on the right uses more of that circular aesthetic that we can see in the pictures that creates some sort of consistency in the types of icons and pictures we use. We also use our colors to pull more attention to our calls to action, which are kind of buttons that we want users to click. And this also keeps more of a limited color palette by making sure that all of the fonts and colors used are the ones from the picture. And finally, we have one more website on a general business website. And if we go to the next one, we'll see that, again, we want the one on the right here, because sometimes less is more. The one on the left is really chaotic. It has a lot of pictures, but this can clutter up the page and make it a lot harder to look at. Additionally, there's more color contrast going on here on the one on the right. On the left one, we can see that a lot of the buttons, the background color is similar to the font color. So this can, again, create more problems in terms of readability and accessibility. So quickly, we can talk about UI and UX together. And we'll give you the chance to critique some designs yourself in a second, but we'll first discuss how the two fields overlap. So both skill sets require a user-first mentality in understanding and solving for user needs and goals. So the UX design process kind of defines how to find and solve these user needs, while UI design involves creating interfaces for products that incorporate the goals in a pleasing fashion. So both of these require design thinking and technical skills in creating the products. And while it is possible to be just a UX or UI designer, both of them are necessary to create a solid product that is usable, useful, and aesthetic. So here are some types of UI/UX projects. So as a UI/UX designer, you can work on anything from product creation to case studies where you actually go and study a product that already exists and maybe improve on it, or redesigns where you completely redesign an existing product. And so next up, we'll talk about some UI and UX tools. As we walk through, we're only going to be working with Figma, which is on the second bullet point today, but there's a lot of different ways to explore how to use UI and UX through all of these different tools. Okay, so next up, we'll be working on actually having UX critiques and designs. So first of all, we're going to have this one on a poster about cactuses. So, or I guess cacti. So if you're in the chat, do you want to maybe say some ways that we could improve on this design? Okay, so we have someone saying that the letters are too big and specifically the title is, and that's very correct. And if we go into the next slide, we can actually see an improvement in the poster where we will now use more of a contrast so you can actually see the titles a bit better. The letters are a little bit smaller. And in general, the layout of the text is a bit better aligned. And so next up, we have a restaurant website. And so does anyone have any critiques for this? Yeah, so we can work on kind of balancing the content. The content is too far to the right. Yeah, the buttons can definitely be a bit more consistent, or at least have different types of buttons on different areas. Remove that excess fruits. These are all really great suggestions. And if we look, we can find another improvement. So again, here we can see that we have more balance in the page. And even though we don't really remove too many elements, it looks a bit better because it looks like there's the oldest space is being used. And this is kind of similar to the travel website that we talked about. And so last, we have, I think we can go to the next one actually. Yeah, so we can talk about the Among Us interface. So can anyone think of any improvements to this one? Yeah, it is hard to differentiate different settings because everything on the left-hand panel is really hard to read. It's all very small in text. We didn't improve this one specifically, but those are definitely some critiques we had. We thought there could be more balance and that some of the icons could be a bit more readable. And yeah, the start button as well isn't very balanced. And so, yeah, these are all really great critiques and good use of learning, of using some of the principles we learned. And I'll turn it over to Olivia.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Olivia. I'm a freshman studying computer science, and I'm the current president of UIUX. And I'll be going through a few principles for UX and UI design that you'll use later when you're working in the workshop on the travel app. So first, we'll talk about what UX design consists of. So a lot of this section of the presentation is based on a book called The Design of Everyday Things, which we would really recommend reading if you're interested in learning more about the topic. So affordance is the properties of a product that determine how it can be used. The signifiers communicate what options users have and how the product should be used. And feedback tells the user what action has occurred and whether their original input has succeeded. So does anyone have an example of each that they can think of, or an example of anyone? You can just put it in the chat. Okay, so it looks like we still haven't solidified the concepts, but so an example of affordance is hovering on a button and receiving a pop-up about the button's function because it's telling you what the purpose is. A really good example of a signifier is good icon usage, such as I think we all know floppy disk is for the save button, even if we haven't seen one before. And a good example of feedback is a pop-up letting you know that your action worked, such as the Facebook sent method. Feedback, okay, so yeah, like comment would be a form of feedback, especially if you send an email and it says like email sent. That's also a great way to think of feedback. So a good thing to remember is that UX design is a cycle because there needs to be ongoing evaluation of whether the design meets user needs, because that's your number one priority. So the four main steps in the UX design cycle are requirement gathering, designing alternatives, prototyping, and evaluation. In the first step, requirements gathering, you have to research the user and their needs, including what they need the product for, what alternative they're currently using, or what's holding them back from successfully completing their task. And once you're able to understand the user, you can start designing alternatives using things like sketches and storyboards to show how you see your product being used. And that's what we'll be doing later in the workshop. So after you've created those sketches, you can model the best designs using wireframes that can actually be tested for usability in the evaluation step. So they're going to be that next level up from the sketches and storyboards. And then finally, you can evaluate using a set of techniques to check whether the design meets the needs of the user. And the evaluation step can contain a lot of different checks depending on what the type of project is. So this is an overview of the main points in requirements gathering. So you have to determine the problem space, the types of users, the types of data, the discovery techniques, and how you're going to present your results. And we'll go more into detail about what each of these things are. And if you have any questions throughout this section, just feel free to put them in the chat and I will answer them as soon as I see them. So understanding the problem space is the most important part of the UX design process. And this includes conducting research into the user, their needs, their goals, and the current methods in achieving them. So the problem space basically encompasses everything that you're trying to solve or create. And these are some of the guiding questions that you can use to focus on answering using the techniques we'll summarize later. So you're thinking about who your users are, how do they currently accomplish the thing that you want to make easier, and what do they see as problems, so things that you can fix. And there are a bunch of different discovery techniques that you can use to find these things out. So for naturalistic observation, you're going to watch the user in their environment and collect qualitative and quantitative data, like taking notes or counting actions or events. And we talk a lot about biases just to make sure that we're getting correct feedback on the user. But so there's no real bias here because you're not directly interacting with the user, but the data is limited to what you're able to observe. During surveys, you can get the user's opinions using quantitative data such as rankings, lists, and dichotomous questions. This is going to be really easy to analyze, but it's really heavily affected by superficial knowledge, recall bias, and sample bias, because I think as we normally know, if someone's going to fill out a survey, they're usually upset about the way something works, so you might not be getting the most accurate data. And then focus groups of 5 to 7 users usually involve a 5-minute warm-up and creative exercise, and then 45 minutes of discussion to collect notes, transcriptions, and you'll get really great data from this because a group dynamic provides a lot more feedback, and you need a good moderator. But sometimes a single member can dominate, and there are a lot of social and desirability biases at play. Someone says they like or dislike some feature, other members of the group may be more compelled to agree with them. And then, okay, do hate comments count as naturalistic observation? Because you are not interfering, but you don't see them using the product. What do you exactly mean by hate comments? What naturalistic observation is maybe you're putting the user in front of the product and you're just watching how you interact with them or how they interact with the product. You're not actually directly interacting them. So I'm not 100% sure what you're asking. Criticizing in the internet or with other people. So it would have to be like directly in your product. That would just kind of be data that maybe you could collect otherwise, but I don't think it falls directly into any of these categories. If someone perhaps enters something in a survey to say that they hate your product, that would be something that would collect, but I think just analyzing the internet in general, that wouldn't be part of any of these discovery techniques. So then the last one we're going to go into is interviews, which are one-on-one conversations with the user to gather more in-depth information in the form of notes and transcriptions. This is also more flexible, but you do need a moderator and more time. So as you can see, the last 2 techniques here, focus groups and interviews, do require a moderator. So you're going to need more time and a higher budget to be able to achieve these. Okay, so the next step is designing alternatives. And once the design requirements are established from the last step, you can begin to develop design alternatives. The goal of this step is to create interfaces that better meet the needs of the user. So how can you make your previous product better, or how can you create a great product right off the bat? You have to keep in mind that the interfaces should be useful and usable, depending, no matter what your personal taste or preference is, those are the things that should be kept first. And you really need to keep in mind the user's needs. So the timeline for this section is determining the design space. So what problems do you have to fix, then determining the user's needs, then using those needs to find the functional requirements of the product and the non-functional requirements. And for this step, some things that you could provide at the end are notes, affinity diagrams, which are just groupings of ideas related to specific categories. This could just be a picture of a bowl with sticky notes on it or anything like that. Okay. And then prototyping means creating an early model for your design. And these are used a lot often because they are cheaper than creating multiple fully fleshed out designs because they're more bare bones. So they allow designers to manage resources and iterate on more designs than if they were going to go full on into one prototype. And horizontal prototypes model the breadth of design features for a project, so they can span across a lot of different pages or a lot of different product options, while vertical prototypes model a smaller number of features in greater depth. So if you are having an issue with one section of your website, only the design, say on the checkout page, that might require a vertical prototype, whereas a full redesign of a website or a product would use a horizontal prototype. And then within prototypes, there are two more subcategories, low fidelity and high fidelity prototypes. Low fidelity prototypes will not look like a final design at all, but they'll include sketches, storyboards, and card-based wireframes. Some things to keep in mind about each of these are that sketches aren't artistic, but they're used to help conceptualize your ideas. Storyboards can create a narrative by putting the design in context and consider how the user will interact with the design. So you can think of some potential user scenarios and go more in depth with those with a storyboard. And then card-based wireframes map out sequences of interactions within the interface. So again, looking at how the user uses the product. High fidelity prototypes are really similar to the final design in form and function and usually require software such as Figma. We'll be looking at a high fidelity prototype later today. You can also use other methods such as proof of concept videos where you walk someone through the app, but those are a little less common. Okay, so we're going to get into a more interactive portion now, talking about what UX design consists of. So here are some overarching principles. If you think about the last section, the first two principles here are taken from that book again, signifiers and feedback. We'll go over these quickly again and then go more in depth into the later principles. So signifiers, again, they tell the user how the product should be used. Some questions you can ask yourself are, why did you place an element at this location? Does the location make sense? Are there other alternatives that would be more clear? And your job, again, is to create a layout that's intuitive, useful, usable, and beautiful, and most importantly, based on user needs and goals. And a good example of signifier is the hover effect on a button, which lets users know that elements are interactive and will trigger a response. So when your mouse turns into a pointer, you know that the area you're on is clickable. And feedback is a process of sending user information about what has happened after you performed actions in the system. So keep in mind that every action should create a reaction. Another good example of feedback is a loading page, because instead of leaving the page blank and potentially leaving the user thinking that they messed something up on their end, it alerts the user to the fact that the information is still loaded. Consistency lets users settle into your product and feel comfortable using your navigation. This includes a lot of different principles, such as maintaining structure and layout, or using a style guide to define and maintain branding. It just helps the user have to remember less, which is really important. There are also some established patterns, including the F shape, which we talked about earlier, that you can use to ensure that users can easily navigate your site. So one of these established patterns that I think you'll all recognize is that red is normally used for alerts and warnings, and green is used to indicate success or completion. And we're going to go a little bit more into the F shape, which is a super important pattern, on the next slide. So when viewing websites, users normally scan the page in an F shape. This discovery was made a few years ago using heat maps from an eye tracking experiment. So as you can see from the numerals on this slide, your most important element should go in the top left, the next one should go in the top right, and so on. So the first line of sight is across the top of the page. Placing a logo in the top left corner is really common because it allows companies to strengthen their brand identities. It's the first thing people see on that page. Attention decreases as you go down the page, as you all probably know. So your most important information should be big, bold, and at the top of that page. And visual hierarchy refers to how the designer guides users' attention through a product. This can be achieved using a lot of different methods, such as typography, color theory, content blocks, component design, and other layout principles. A really important aspect is creating good call to actions to direct your users to the actions you want them to take. So this includes placing add to cart buttons near items and other actions like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of typography. Two things that are often confused are typefaces and fonts. So a typeface is a set of symbols and characters, so letters, numbers, other characters and a font is a complete character set within a typeface, often of a particular size and style. For example, serif is a typeface and Times New Roman is a font within the serif typeface. And then the typefaces come in 6 main styles. So serif typefaces have the small lines attached to the main strokes of the characters. Sans serif typefaces lack those details. Scripts are based on handwriting and are often categorized into formal and casual. Display typefaces are the broadest category, but are not suitable for large blocks of text. So if you think back to that cacti example, the title on the top, that would have been display typeface. Then dingbats are specialty typefaces that are just made of symbols and ornaments. Proportional typefaces have letter spacing adjusted based on aesthetics, while monospace typefaces have a single space and width. You can also vary the moods, weights, and styles as needed within your project, but don't try to mix and match too many styles and classifications because you won't have your brand image shine through. So there's a lot of things we could go into with color theory, but we're going to keep it pretty brief. So there's a mathematical model called color space, which describes the color range as colors including RGB, HST, and more. So it includes terminologies such as primary, secondary, and tertiary colors, complementary, adjacent, and additive colors, as well as subtractive colors. Some things we can do to change the way the color appears are adjusting hue, saturation, and value. Other things we can change are tint, shade, tone, brightness, and intensity. There's also an important aspect of psychology to consider here, which is color emotion, because we may associate some colors with things that we don't necessarily want to put in our product, such as red is often associated with anger. So perhaps if you were a yoga studio, you wouldn't want to use red on your website. We'll cover accessibility a bit more in the next section, but you should always test for color blindness and contrast, as 8% of the male population is red-green colorblind. Okay, so contrast helps lead the reader through your layout. Each component has a job to do, and each of these jobs slots into your page hierarchy. With creative uses of contrast, such as the ones you can see here on this page, you can change user choices and compel specific actions. So we're going to get into an interactive section now. I'll be putting a poll up, and then if you could just click the answer that you agree with, we'll see what the results are. So, which shape seems bigger here? Okay, so it looks like we have 8 responses so far, and we have 11 responses now, and 9 of you are saying the square seems bigger. So that is a visual effect. Now, what about here? I'm going to relaunch the polls. Let me just. Which one seems bigger here? Okay, so 8 of you have responded, and you've said neither. So the interesting thing with optical weight is how we perceive the size and significance of an object is not necessarily the true size. So circles, diamonds, triangles, and other non-square shapes need to be higher and wider to be balanced with square shapes. And if you're putting an icon inside a button, you should have some space reserved for optical balancing. This is really important to have sizing appear consistent throughout the site. So as we just saw, just because something is the same height doesn't make sure it appears that way. And we're going to go into another example. So do these appear aligned? Okay, this is actually really interesting. So most of you are saying yes. Normally in our meetings, people have said no. So we will look at the next slide and then compare. So what about on this slide? Do they appear aligned? Okay, so we're saying no to this one. So if you look at it, shapes with sharp edges should be larger or longer to appear balanced with neighboring rectangular objects. There's one way to do this called cap height alignment. It's especially useful if you're positioning button names on backgrounds. one of the best ways to correctly position a triangle is to encircle it and then align the circle with the background instead. So we're going to get into some more questions. So another interesting thing is that our eyes are more sensitive to the height of an object than its width. And then there's a group of principles called the Gestalt principles, developed by German psychologists based on the theory that an organized whole is perceived as greater than the sum of its parts, and it's built on 4 main ideas. So emergence states that people identify elements first in their general outlined form. We can recognize a simple object better than a detailed one. Reification states that people can recognize objects when parts of them are missing using patterns in our memory. Multi-stability states that people will interpret ambiguous objects in more than one way. And then invariance states that people can recognize objects independently of the rotation, scale, and translation. So we're going to see if you can identify which photo matches to which effect. So emergence is that you can identify an element just using its general outlined form. Reification is that you can recognize an object when parts of them are missing using a pattern in your memory. Multi-stability is that you can interpret something that's ambiguous in more than one way. And invariance is that you can recognize something independent of its rotation, scale, and translation. Okay, I'm just going to give it a minute so 2 more people can respond. All right, perfect. So the first photo is definitely a reification. So parts of it are missing and we can fill it in using patterns in our memory. The second is emergence because it's just a general outline form, but we still recognize what it is. The third photo is definitely multi-stability because you can either see a face or a vase. And the fourth one is invariance because you can usually recognize the Google logo independent of which way it's rotated. So 2 more important concepts are accessibility and usability, which are critical in examining and evaluating your design. There are a lot of established guidelines to determine this with looser principles for usability. Definitely recommend checking out the web standards on accessibility. They're super helpful for all design projects pretty much, and especially if you're working for a company, they're really important to make sure that you're following them because they are legal standards. And I'm going to pass it back over to Sohini to talk about the travel app.
Okay, so we'll go into building a travel app. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So now we're going to go into building and designing a travel app. And I just wanted to quickly start off with a bit of inspiration. So here are some examples of other designs of travel apps. In this one, you can see there's like a loading screen and then a home screen and then kind of a tour details page. And so this one's really nice because it shows you exactly what country you're looking into, all the tours and opportunities available and whatnot. And I pulled out some of the colors available here. Moving into the next one, we can see there's more examples on this one. We have, again, kind of a loading screen where you can enter the app. We have a home screen, which uses more images than the previous one. And another travel detail page. And these are the colors used here. They're more purple based. And here's the last example. So once more, a loading screen and then a home screen. This one has a bit more variety in other types of designs, but a lot of these maintain the same general principles. And these are the colors here. So kind of going into it, our goal here today is to build a travel app that focuses on selling tours in various locations. So the main pages we're going to focus on are loading, home, and tour details. And we're going to be building this in Figma. So if you go to this link, we can talk about some of the requirements for our app. And it should take you to this poll over here, which will ask you what are some requirements for a travel app. So this is the link, and I can also put into the chat. And once you enter the link, just add in some of the requirements that you saw on the travel app that our app design should have. So here you can add anything. And I can give some ideas here as well. So if you think any of these are important for the travel app, then go ahead and type it into the poll that I dropped in the chat, and we can see from there which ones we'll keep for the main travel app. And I'll give it a couple of minutes. Yeah, these are all really great. And feel free to vote for the ones that you like the most. You can go back to this one. So it seems like some of the ones that people are voting for are fields to select countries, a tour details page, photos, a lot of photos, and being able to see kind of maybe how much the tours cost. Oh, and a price range one as well. All right, so going back in, here are some of the main requirements. In the tour details, we can also add budget options, which is one of the ones from the poll. And we'll go ahead and we'll make sure to keep this in mind as we continue to develop. And I will actually put this in the chat in case any of you guys want this. Okay, so now moving into the actual UI design. So that's kind of the UX part of it, requirements gathering. Now we're moving to UI. So let's first talk about the color palette. So can you drop in the chat maybe which color palette you like the most? And just using the number like 1, 2, 3, or 4, and we'll pick which one has the most messages in the end. So someone's saying 3, someone says 2, another 3, another 2, and a 3. Very balanced right now between 3 and 2. Okay. Currently, I think we have 4 for 3 and 3 for 2.
I think we're tied.
Are we tied?
Yeah. Okay. I think 2 won.
Okay, we can go with 2 then. So I'm just going to quickly copy this. And next up, we're going to have the font combinations. So of these fonts, which one is your favorite? Again, same thing, just type it into the chat. We have for all of these a serif at the top and a sans serif at the bottom. We have another 2, a 1, and a 3.
Here, I might just create a poll.
Sure. In the meantime, I'll just paste our color palette here, just for reference. And then when Olivia sends out the poll, then we can just vote onto that one because it looks like this one's a bit more distributed across. Okay, yeah, so vote for your favorite font here. The nice thing about this type of choosing fonts and colors is that there's not really a right answer, but there are certain ones that can be more accessible and readable for a user. So it's important to keep that in mind. And it looks like choice 3 is currently winning. So I can go ahead and copy and that one over as well underneath here. And we will keep these combinations now as we start to build our app. So moving in, here's kind of a template I built. And so we have a couple of elements and components that we can use. I brought in icon set, we have some images, and some general other elements like buttons and other options like that. And so we have our loading screen here, we have a home screen, and we have a tour detail screen. And I'm going to post our chosen UI elements over here. So the serif we ended up choosing was Tinos, and the sans serif we ended up choosing was Nunito Sans. And so we can go ahead and change some of these quickly here. And while I do that, can everyone type in maybe potential names for our travel app into the chat? And we'll have Olivia choose one of the names. So yeah, if you have any ideas for a potential travel app name, yeah, drop it into the chat. We have TravX, that's really cool. Does anyone else have any other travel app name ideas? Places. We'd have a travel app named Places. Very fitting for a travel app as well. And I'm just going to quickly change this one as well.
I think, in my opinion, Travelicious. I think that will be the winning name.
Travelicious. Travelicious is a good name.
Oh, okay. If we're gonna add a tagline,
Ooh.
because then we can replace the unforgettable experiences at your fingertips.
That's true. That's a good one.
Okay, I think we'll go with that then.
Okay, so we're gonna make this X mark your next destination. So Olivia's chosen Travel X. So I'll put that into here. All right. And so now we can see that if this was an app, we have our name up here. We have kind of an image just to keep some balance in the screen, and then some more text at the bottom. So what we can do now is go ahead and increase the size of this font, because right now it's kind of small. And we'll add some of we'll go ahead and move some of the icons and the text over here. And we'll send out a poll now for some of the color choices that we're gonna use. So we have this one, black, we have dark green, light green, and gray. And so to decide what we're gonna use for which elements, we'll have a poll set up. And in the meantime, I'll keep adjusting this one. Okay. So for the background color, we have this poll. And so what do we want the main screen's background to be? Looks like it's kind of a tie between dark green and light green. I can actually go ahead and change them to all of them just so we can see which one would be the best. So this is what the black would look like. This one's what the dark green would look like. And we'll change the font colors accordingly as well. This is the light green. And this is the gray. So it looks like light green and gray are currently tied. Actually, maybe some of you guys weren't able to vote before you saw it. So I'll just end the poll really quickly, but then send it again. Yeah, so maybe vote again with, in case your opinion changed at all. And I'll just, yeah, I can also change it really quickly. Okay, so it looks like right now the light green is the winner. And so we can use that as the background. And so this is what it currently looks like. So we have Trav X, and we have X marks your next destination down here. And so this is our loading screen. So next up, we're gonna have our home screen. And so for this one, we'll decide, I can bring in some of the elements that we've created already and move it into our screen. So these are kind of, or I guess we can do this one first. So in a lot of the other examples we saw, which I'll go up to, there's kind of a main featured area where like we have some of the featured tours and then the general examples at the bottom. And so we'll go ahead and do the same thing. We'll pull in some example tours. Of course, it's an MIT campus tour because we are UIUX at MIT. And we'll put it over here. And so right now we have a main scroll going on this way where we can look at the different tours available. And below that, we need to have the rest of the tours. So we'll go ahead and pull it from here and place it in. And so you can keep adjusting all of these as necessary and try to keep it centered. This part takes a lot of time, just trying to figure out where to align different elements, but once you have it right, it is really worth it. All right. So MIT is located in Cambridge, so that's why we have our selection here. So this is where you'd kind of pick a place to go to and choose it. We have our menu buttons up here and our user icon over here, along with all of these. And so we also can go back and look at the fonts we chose. And specifically we use Tino's. So I'll just go ahead and change all the fonts here to Tino's. So now that we have those fonts changed, we need to change these ones as well really quickly.
And another important thing to mention here is that this drag and drop feature is not only available in wireframes, there's actually something called a design framework that you can use in code where you pretty much just copy and paste the element and it'll already have these sections pre-designed. So you might have one called image card where you could just change the background image and the star rating and the text based on whatever you're populating into that section. So this is something that's really useful to make sure you're maintaining that consistency principle that we talked about earlier.
So over here, I'm just changing the background of some of these to be the darker green that we chose, just so that it's a bit more readable for the white text on top. So I'll put that in here and maybe increase the background opacity a bit. So because a lot of these ones don't really have a darker background, so like in this example, when we look at it, the local cafes words blend a lot into the image itself, and that's not good. We want there to be some contrast. So if we add in this local cafes background, then we can actually see it pop and we can see it a bit better. So now that's our home screen created, and we change the color of this one as well to our darker color. And quickly go in and change that. And we'll also grab our new black and change it generally in our app. Oh no, maybe not for that one. Okay, never mind. So we'll go back into it and change it for these. All right. So this is what our new home screen looks like using our new colors, our new fonts. And we'll finally go into our screen for the tour details. And so for this one, again, I have a couple of elements already pre-made. And so we can just drag them in. And so for this one, we can see that for all the things we wanted, which was the place to say what the price is for the budgets and a buy button and the rating. There's not that much space, so now we have to figure out how to work on some balance. And so for that, we can first try to decrease some of the font sizes just to get things to fit a bit better. Maybe turn this into a 30-point font and turn this into a size 40 icon. And we can move things around. So a lot of the design process is iterating like this and like trying to work around with your designs to figure out what exactly works the best. That look better in 36 size. Yeah. We can go ahead and look at our description. Maybe we can bold this one to get some contrast going on. And we'll have our description. And at the bottom, we can drag in some of these elements. So we can have our buy button over here. And we'll pull in our price as well. And I can go over and select some of the colors that we chose for the background for this button. And make sure that all of these are the blacks we chose. So by clicking the frame, I can select the entire kind of screen and get the whole thing to change colors, which is really convenient. So this is what this is looking like now. So this is kind of the tour details page. We could add more elements to it, like stars for the ratings and whatnot. And in fact, I might go ahead and try to adjust that right now and pull in the number of stars for the tours. And yeah, we'll just keep adjusting it until we figure out what works the best for us. And this one kind of looks good because you can see some details at a glance with this design. Right. And so looking at it now, we have a loading screen, a home screen, and two detail screen built up using all the principles that we chose. And so this is kind of a speed run of building a travel app. And we can compare it to some of the ones that we saw at the beginning. And I think it looks pretty similar. They all look very fun and exciting and engaging. And so, yeah, we were able to build a travel app today. And with that, I think we're going towards the end of our workshop. And so I'll stop sharing my screen. And so thank you so much for coming out to our workshop and coming along and building this travel app with us. We'll take any questions that you need right now. And if you want any follow-ups, feel free to email us or follow us on Instagram. But yeah, that was definitely a fast, quick speed run of building the design of the app. But yeah.
Yeah, and we post more UI and UX tips 3 days a week on our Instagram. So if you're interested in learning more about the topic, definitely follow us on there.
So for languages, a lot of these apps, or I guess specifically maybe for web applications, you'll often use HTML to place elements. You can use CSS for styling it, and you can use JavaScript for building out logic for the web application. A lot of these, there's a lot of new frameworks that keep coming out that you can use to address that, but those are the main three for these types of design related coding.
And I can also say our UI UX website, I believe it is on a public GitHub, account. So if you're interested in that, that was built in React, which is a JavaScript framework. And I guess what inspired you to do UI UX design? I can go first. So I have been working at Bloomberg, which is a financial news company, for the last 3 years within their data visualization department. So that means working on graphs, charts, that kind of stuff. And I've worked on like building new charts for the company, as well as making it easier for existing users to navigate through their charts and use them. And just like being able to see how it can improve people's experiences with some small tweaks is what inspired me to join this club.
Yeah, and I got interested in UI UX design because a couple of years ago, I started looking more into how to build web applications, and that kind of led me through the rabbit hole of learning about Figma and learning about design. And so I started taking a couple courses online just to learn more about it. And I do some art, so I thought it was really interesting how it kind of bridges art and technology in a way that's focused on users and people. So I thought that was really exciting.
Yeah, and also for myself, I'll say that my job title at work, I'm not actually a designer, I'm a software engineer, but a lot of what I do is focused on making client experience better. So it's really important to have an understanding and awareness and like an ability to implement all of these principles, because they make sure that people want to continue using your product, even if you're not a designer. Okay, so this is actually a really good question in the Q&A. So what do we think UI and UX can do together with physics and science? So I can say, at least from the perspective that I'm from, so I'm from data visualization, which is kind of breaking things down from complex problems into things that are pretty easy to understand. So for example, one project that I worked on was visualizing integrals in calculus. So how can we split up basically this object into tiny slices so we can see how we can calculate the volume of something? And I think UI UX is really important in data visualizations themselves, because you need to have appropriate labeling, keys, and a good design to make sure people can understand data specifically. So I think UI UX can help break down a lot of concepts in physics and science and make them more accessible.
I guess there's another question about something where there's UI UX design that we wouldn't really think of. I think one thing that's kind of interesting is just really how the world is designed. There's a kind of an important saying in design, which is that you shouldn't ever have to specifically give instructions or tell someone how to use something, or else your design's bad. So one example is kind of like door handles, where sometimes you'll like push on it, but it's actually a pull door, or it's a pull door and you'll be trying to push on it, trying to get out, but that won't work. So there's a lot of different ways to use door handles, and something to keep an eye out for is which door handles you always get correct and which door handles you always get confused on. And that's a really kind of interesting phenomenon where you like realize like some door handles are designed with bad UX, where you like will not be able to use it right on the first try.
Yeah, I think another thing is, I know in the London subway system, the card scanners are actually on an angle, so you can tap them as you're going in instead of having to place them on top of the bar to tap them. Like UX experience is in, it's in pretty much everything. It's in physical products as well as the web, which is something I don't think we got into too much in this presentation, but it encompasses any sort of product. So if you think about that, like pretty much anything can be encompassed in user experience. There's so many examples.
I guess maybe this can be like the last call for questions before we wrap it up. So does anyone have any last lingering questions? Always feel free to follow us on Instagram and message us there. We can respond or email us. And yeah, we have even more resources. We have a whole public Google Drive of resources. So if you are interested in getting a link to that, we'd be happy to send it. That has master lists of different links and resources, as well as notes from various courses on web design and UI UX that we can share.
And if anyone on the YouTube live stream has questions, I'm looking at that too. If you want to ask anything there, I will be able to answer it. Okay, thank you all for coming. Definitely make sure to follow us on Instagram. Please email us if you have any questions about the club or if there's anything you're interested in learning more about. It was so great to hear from you all today. Thank you for coming.
Bye, thank you.